Welcome everybody. We'd like to get started on time and finish on time, so we'll plunge right into it. First of all, welcome Stephen and Raj from West Vancouver. I really appreciate you coming over and helping us to try to understand more about how you do things.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll just have to work through a few things at first. Also, welcome to Maureen, who's just joined our group. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you.
You feel like you're a veteran of everything on Bowen. So, Maureen's our liaison with the tourism Bowen Island, and so very welcome in addition. Just a couple of quick things. Are there any late items for these?
Two late items. One is the work plan, which will be an info item, so it's item 10.1. That will be a standing item on our agenda moving forward. And the second is one of Mr. Mikic's documents he's sharing with us, so that'll be for 4.1. It's an overview of the development of the economic development plan in this one.
That's the Coles notes.
Coles notes.
Yeah.
Single space, mind you.
So will this change every month?
No.
No, okay. The work plan, okay.
That's our annual work plan
Okay, fine.
for this year's work.
Can you introduce ourselves?
Oh yeah, sorry, that's a good idea, Maureen. Yeah, sorry. Would you like to start, Stephen, and introduce yourself?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't paying attention to the agenda, so we're already here. My name is Stephen Mikicich. I'm the Manager of Economic Development for the District of West Vancouver. And Steph had invited me to come to this meeting because, as I understand it, you're looking at potentially creating an economic development function. You're looking at how you might structure that, staffing, etc. So it's actually quite timely given where we're at in the process. So this, I'm just going to go through a few highlights on this.
Can I just stop you 1 second, Stephen?
Sorry.
I think it would be good if we just sort of went around the table and said hello to everybody and introduced everybody.
Perfect, that would be great.
And then we'll deal with a couple of quick items on the agenda, and then we'll get to your
Oh, okay.
full
No
talk.
worries.
Is that okay?
Yeah, no worries.
So if you could just say who you're the Economic Development Officer for Manager for West Vancouver.
Yes.
And Raj, what's your
I'm Chief Financial Officer for Bowen Island. I started
you're
here
the
in
guy.
February.
Sorry.
He used to be with West Vancouver.
I was with West Vancouver and
Right,
Casino there.
Oh, cool. That's great. Welcome.
I'm Robin Fenton, architect by trade and member of the committee.
Oh, fantastic.
Maureen Swassey. I have many hats.
I'm the staff liaison for the EDC, Stephanie.
I'm John Parker. I'm the chair, and I run a business downtown and tourism.
I'm Edward Walkman, and I'm on the committee.
I'm Maureen Nicholson. I'm the council liaison for this committee, and in my day job, I'm a college professor in Westminster.
Oh, okay, fantastic.
I'm Dr. Michelle Nelson, and I work as the manager of research sustainability for the Simon Fraser University campuses.
And Rod,
Yeah, sorry to jump in. I'm Rod Marsh, and I have a painting and drywall contracting business here in Bowen.
apart from, we're all volunteers except for staff, and Maureen who's a councillor, more or less a volunteer, working at less than minimum wage. And there's a couple of, I see we've got a couple of audience members, past audience out there. One, Gordon Ganong, former chair of the EDC for many years. Welcome, Gordon. I'm nervous now.
Good morning.
And I'm sorry, I don't know your name at the back there. Oh, cool. And Barry, would you like to just introduce yourself?
Hi, Barry Finn.
Okay.
Rewired. In rewirement.
Okay, so we'll come to the talk in a second. First of all, adoption of the minutes from the last meeting. So everyone ready? Yeah,
Motion to approve.
Maureen's motion to approve, seconded by Rod. All in favour? Okay. public comments. Anybody in the audience want to make any public comments, Gordon? No? Delegation. Okay, so Stephen, now it's your turn.
Thank you. Well, actually, I just want to acknowledge Gordon again and to thank him, because when I started this work, Gordon was a great resource for me, because you just launched branding, very successful branding for Bowen. And that was really great. So thank you, Gordon, for your time and advice. This document, which you all have, I also have a number of extra copies in color, and I could leave some with staff if needed. So the plan itself, this is a 90-page document which summarizes 2 years of work. And I'll just kind of walk through how we started and why. So the nucleus for this plan was really the desire of our Chief Administrative Officer to strengthen our local economy. And the first step was to get a better understanding of our current population and where it was trending. So there were updated demographic forecasts that were prepared. And then she commissioned some work to determine West Vancouver's competitive identity and place equity. And we worked with a firm called Resonance, which prepared a few background reports. And this is prior to me stepping on the role. So early in 2016, I was with the district. I've been there for 14 years now, and all of that was in planning. So I was manager of community planning, ready to move on with our official community plan update. But the CAO asked me to take on a new role focused on economic development. So that took me a little bit by surprise, and I was thinking, well, economic development, West Vancouver, what are we really talking about? So there wasn't a job description, there wasn't a clear mandate, so I said, well, okay, let me figure this out. And I had a bit of a clean slate, so I came back in a week with several binders of research, and I think this is what we need to be doing. So I had an opportunity to create my own job description, set my terms, but most importantly, one of my requirements is that I be able to report directly to the CAO. I am essentially, I was telling staff this, a department of one with no operational budget. So pulling together this really required some creativity and innovation, and part of it was pulling favors, but it was also developing a really interesting partnership structure, which brought in UBC Sauder School of Business, an international forum of business schools called the Global Network for Advanced Management. So we had several teams of MBA students delving into, our economic issues and opportunities. We really brought together our local business community, which had been quite fractured. One of the key developments just prior to this was the establishment of the Ambleside-Dunderray Business Improvement Association. That entity represents 700 businesses and commercial property owners, and they have a 10-year mandate, can raise up to $5.6 million in self-funding through a BIA levy. So for the first time, we have a really strong business voice that is funded on the ground in our town center. So that was, those were some of the background pieces. But because I report to the CAO, I'm able to work cross-divisionally. I'm kind of at par with the other directors in name only. But what it does, it allows me to tap into the staff expertise and resources in other divisions. And I kind of have to have one foot in the building and one foot out the door, hopefully not in a bad way. But I work very closely with the community itself. So I'm, at every meeting of the ADBIA, I've engaged them in the OCP and other municipal projects, work closely with our chamber. But we've also built working relationships with Creative BC, Destination BC, the tech sector, etc. So we've also figured out that local economic development really isn't a standalone function in West Vancouver. Growing and diversifying the local economy is really a fundamental requirement from transitioning West Vancouver which is a textbook bedroom municipality to a more resilient community. So a lot of this is, yes, we want to generate more opportunities for local businesses, but we also, to do that, we also need to influence land use change, provide the kind of housing that the community needs. We're the only municipality in Metro Vancouver with a declining population. So something is wrong. Our landscape was stamped in the 1950s, and it was great when you had a homogeneous population of young families with children buying homes, etc. The other thing that's interesting about West Vancouver is that our local economy has only ever existed to serve the needs of residents, and it's sort of manifested in 5 commercial areas. Just kind of a synopsis of the process. So what all this led to was really a focus on 3 areas. One is we have people that come to West Vancouver all the time for different things, be it skiing, be it going to the Harmony Arts Festival, but they don't, or walk the seawall, but they don't tend to stop and spend money. So the idea we explored with the MBA students was, what is West Vancouver's potential to become a visitor destination? And clearly, you know, it's quite strong. So the economic plan is built on 3 strategies. One is a visitor strategy. There are 20 very specific recommendations, but it's to position West Vancouver as a regional day trip destination in both the Sea to Sky corridor and in Metro Vancouver. And the way the planning areas for Destination BC works, the North Shore straddles both, but we're very much just the route between Vancouver and Whistler. So that's a key opportunity for us. Again, because our land base is 83% of our developed land area is residential, and most of that's single family, and less than 1% is commercial. So we don't have any land to accommodate new investment or commercial expansion. What we found in our working with the various industrial sectors is that if we had land available and policies to support it, we could secure a film studio, a technology center if we had a housing component, 1 or more boutique hotels, an Indigenous cultural center. I mean, there's several campus of care for seniors. So these are all potential projects, but again, we have had very restrictive land use planning or policies over the years. So around that, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, is what we refer to as the emerging opportunity strategy. And the message to our council is that these are very real opportunities for creating employment, for supporting thoughtful land use change. But unless we're willing to consider thoughtful land use change, we can say goodbye to all of those and focus on trying to build a modest visitor economy and to strengthen our commercial areas. So the commercial area strategy speaks to more clearly defining the role and function of our existing commercial areas, and particularly the town center. We've been talking about revitalizing Ambleside for 30 or 40 years. And you know, we've, as a municipality, thrown money at it, but it's never been part of a comprehensive plan. Now, with the BIA actually representing the people that own the town center and have the ability to affect change, the key thing there is developing our OCP and town center plan that actually enable development to occur. The ADBI commissioned a study. I don't know if the name Richard Wozni is familiar to anyone here, but a very well-known land economist. This happened to be the last piece of work he did. He finished it the day before he died in January. But the aim there was for the BIA to understand, you know, it isn't tiny village or high-rise jungle. Somewhere in between is where they need to land. And you know, some of the challenges for retailers there, for successful businesses, if they want to grow, they have to leave because we don't have the premises. And if they can find a site the cost for upgrading through tenant improvements is so high, and you don't have the ability to amortize that because every property has a demolition clause on it. So these are some of the real challenges. The BIA has also been working to create an identity and brand and marketing plan for Ambleside. They've invested in wayfinding infrastructure to connect the commercial area to the very busy waterfront. So those are some of the things that are underway. There are 20 recommendations in the visitor strategy and about 33 recommendations overall. Again, as a department of one, plan implementation will be, I'll be leading that, but with interdivisional staff and our external partners. And the way we're funding this is kind of on a project-by-project basis. So some of my priorities are really focused on the visitor strategy and a district-wide wayfinding plan, creating content, visual content and for a media campaign and branding. But on the last page here, I've also included some of the key challenges. I think moving forward, it's very interesting in a community like West Vancouver where the bureaucracy has been shaped over time to somewhat reflect the community. Most of our departments still work in silos. There is really a lack of understanding of the business community as a body of taxpayers. There's been a history of business community disengagement with local government. That has changed with the establishment of the ADBIA. The Chamber's going through a bit of I think a restructuring and a refocusing to be a more effective business voice. We've also been very disconnected, our local economy with the regional and provincial economies. That's why we've been sort of immune to busts and booms. But to tap into those opportunities, we need to be much more integrated with the region. I think also, and I'll just kind of wrap up a few things here, there's been, I think, a real lack of community vision and leadership in our community for the longest time. We tend to focus on an issue or development. And through my role, I'm working with council members and council candidates and stressing the importance of having a guiding vision for the future. How do we get to be that resilient community? Yes, housing is part of it, so is transportation, but let's not just debate the issues, let's focus on where we need to go. So in that respect, the language in here is also a little bit of an influencer, as is the business community. One thing we've also found is that some of our traditional partner agencies have capacity limitations. So how do we strengthen those and make the right investments? And again, the Chamber is a good example. How do we advance a strategic plan for the Chamber and help improve its funding model so we can tap into grants and other things? I think I'll close on that, and hopefully, I'm here. I'd be delighted to have a discussion. I'm going to leave my business cards with staff and a few copies of this, and I'd be happy to, call me, or I'd be happy to meet again too.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah. Are you have a little time for some questions?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, perhaps I could kick it off by saying this sort of ideas that has been around this table for some time now is the idea of community economic development, and because we're not going to try and attract a mill here or an old school business, and so our focus has been about developing the community as a great place to live, in the faith that people will then want to find work here. What do you consider? Did you look at the whole community economic development movement and concept, or is that not really?
Not in a formalized way, but whatever we call this, I don't really see this as pure economic development. when I was in planning school many years ago, the S word, sustainability, started to become very popular. But a much more meaningful word is resilience. And that is something through UBC Solder and the Rockefeller Network for Resilient Communities. It's a very powerful word because, when you look at cities around the world, how does New Orleans become more resilient to the next Katrina? How does, how do parts of the world like Bangladesh deal with, famine and flood? How do the Balkans try to keep things under control? So when I threw West Vancouver into that discussion, I was really embarrassed because here we are, a very privileged municipality in such a safe, beautiful part of the world. And, we don't have those kinds of resilience shocks, but we have challenges that eat away. And they are very much, I guess, inherent in a bedroom community. It's our demographic profile, more singular land uses. So the people that kind of built the community, a lot of them are still around, but they're into their 80s and 90s and living in large homes up steep driveways. Those that have the means and options, like 40% of the buyers in the Shipyards district in North Vancouver are coming from West Vancouver. We had a one-day transit strike, which meant businesses were crippled because our entire workforce comes from somewhere else. So for us, the way to address this is less about economic development and more about community land use planning that tackles housing, that tackles transportation, that welcomes investment. So those are our challenges. When I look at Bowen Island, I don't know the community very well, but I think the first step is really defining what are the opportunities and challenges. The word industry is also interesting because West Vancouver is a residential community largely because we failed to attract industry early on. And there is a place for a community like West Vancouver, but it's not working anymore. So we're not talking about a radical shift, attracting a major employer, etc. But it's trying to address those issues, work towards a more multi-generational community, allow people to live in the community in which they work as opposed to commute elsewhere, allow for people with lower paying jobs to actually potentially imagine living there. I mean, so this isn't going to happen overnight, but this is what we need to address. And without losing sight of the community character and its history and what it's all about. So I think that's the first step for Bowen, is to understand what's your foundation to build on.
How far along is your OCP revision?
Sorry, what was the question?
The OCP update or new?
Yeah, I have a personal bias there because West Vancouver really needed a robust OCP. Our current one from 2004 is really a straitjacket. It was developed with a view to maintaining the status quo, but if anything, it did not prevent change. It precipitated something that no one anticipated. So when you tell the world that you're a residential community and primarily single family, it's attractive to people all over the world, and a lot of money has flown into West Vancouver. And most of our development regulations have been very laissez-faire. I mean, there was no tree bylaw, you could alter a site. So, well, this is a nice neighborhood, but the lots are a bit small. I'll buy 5 and I'll build my dream home because I can. So the very simple thing was, 10 years ago we completed a project called the Community Dialogue on Neighborhood Character and Housing. And we knew then what people wanted to see. More townhouses, duplexes, coach houses, rental options, etc. Near community services and that. And we knew we had a 10-year window in which to develop that. We asked people how suitable was their housing, and that's fine. Well, what about 5 years? What about 10 years from now? Then it started to plummet. So where we're at with the current OCP, I think there was a disconnect. It started out way too timid, and we have some very good high-level language moving forward, but the problem is existing area policies are also being rolled right back in. So for the town center, for example, it's no further ahead. It'll be another 2 or more years before we have those policies worked out. It's on the right track, but it won't deliver things overnight.
You mentioned you ask people. What kind of research did you do, and how did you conduct it?
In terms of, I'm sorry.
Just about what people wanted.
We didn't ask people what they wanted.
Okay, or what they needed. How did you find that out?
Well, this was done without extensive public engagement, and that was key because we needed to understand what the real economic challenges were, as well as the opportunities, and we were going to get that from our residents. So what we did is we brought in actually a number of subject matter experts from different sectors. We had our student teams who were looking at the resilient challenges. We brought in key community stakeholders, and we tested out the very basic questions. What is our opportunity to become a visitor destination? And that was quite fleshed out. There were a number of project ideas that came out of that. We learned through that work that for international visitors to British Columbia, an authentic Indigenous tourism experience is like top of the list. So, but when you come to Vancouver, there is no place to learn about the communities across British Columbia. So the opportunity for a visitor center for Indigenous tourism in British Columbia and the national equivalent, there was talk of a site in Vancouver which fell through, and then Richmond, and we said, well, what about West Vancouver? So it's one of the things we're currently working on. We tested out the potential for, we have no formal visitor accommodations other than the Horseshoe Bay Motel. Well, we don't be too shocked. but we've learned from the industry that yes, there is very much a potential market for boutique hotel in the 60 to 70 room size with the right amenities, and maybe more than one. Another opportunity to blend our community character and heritage is to look at homes that are on our community heritage register and give those owners the ability to run a B&B or short-term vacation rentals. We have very restrictive policies around that. To operate one, there are a number of regulations, but you must do a site-specific rezoning. So good luck there. So but this way, you can provide a quintessential West Vancouver, think of staying in the Barrie Downs or Paul Merrick home. That's pretty cool. So those are some of the initiatives. So the research was really, some of the background work was done around positioning West Vancouver through what is its comparative place equity. We understand where we're trending, but it's also the intelligence from the various sectors and what they told us.
If one of the challenges is the land base, the land that's available for commercial use, how are you going to deal with that?
How are we going to deal with that?
Yeah.
Well, we own land, so there are different parcels in different places. So, for example, we acquired a property from Vancouver Coastal Health near our community center, and that's is being looked at for a long-term lease for rental housing, family housing, etc. So that's an example of an opportunity. We do have lands above the highway, and which will come into play as part of Cypress Village. We also have a huge number of parks, some of which are undeveloped or unused. So is there an opportunity for potentially even temporary uses in some of those? Can some be decommissioned? We have a very large park of 21 acres, which is leased to a rugby club. But most people think it's in North Vancouver. It's 21 acres of flat land at the bridgehead. could that be put to a different use? But also private lands, are the Taylorway corridor is identified as a planning area. So if you know Park Royal, the area above there is called Evelyn Drive. So there were like 70 houses or so that were rezoned for multifamily. So there are those, potential opportunities there, but our only greenfield opportunities are in the upperlands, and not a lot. So. The other part is intensification of existing, allowing for greater density and height in our existing areas.
Well, it sounds as though there Smith was focused a little on the intensification.
Yeah, well, he delivers an annual speech to the Chamber of Commerce. And this year he'd asked me for my thoughts, and I thought, well, I've got some ideas. Personally, I really don't want to hear you complain about what's wrong with the community and why aren't we doing anything. He has 3 beautiful grandchildren, and I said, I think the audience would really like to hear what your vision is for this community and what you want to leave to your grandchildren, which inspired him. So, he started showing images of what he wanted to see. And it was a much more positive discussion. It's getting back to the vision and leadership.
Yes.
Can I build on Maureen's
Yes.
question? Just, so either are you recommending or do you think the course of action for those rezoning and creating opportunities would council and the municipality be initiating rezonings and actively saying, hey, we've identified this as an opportunity, we're going to do it, or are you putting out, hey, to partners in the community, we're thinking about this, will you come? Like, what are the kind of steps that you think might
Well,
happen?
this is why the OCP is so critically important. The time frame, we'll cover there is another generation, 20 to 25 years. So it has to be enabling. If you look at something like the Caulfield Shopping Center, which basically is it's like 6 or 7 acres, it serves a local population. It's a prime development site in the future to intensify with mixed use housing, commercial land. But we need policy statements that allow that to be considered. Rather than create policy on the spot when an opportunity comes around. For anyone wanting to invest in West Vancouver, I mean, it has to be one of the highest risk ventures for anyone. But that's because we've had a pervasive influence of NIMBY groups for many years, and that was one of my challenges. But what is very interesting now is that I see a much more progressive voice. The sort of silent majority are saying, look, we can't keep saying no to everything. We're losing our family and friends and children, etc. So we are on the verge of becoming, people call it a resort town or ghost town. These are very serious issues. So, when people look to North Vancouver for vibrancy, they're starting to say, well, why can't we do that here? In our own way.
I'd really like to get a really top-level idea, since you've come from the OCP review and that process and now dive into an economic development plan. How important do you think this economic development plan is going to be going forward as part of shaping the OCP?
Interesting question. So during the OCP review, that's where we've had broad public engagement, and there is a section in there on the local economy. This is fed directly into that, and the business community has been part of it. This went to council not for approval, but for information in February. It was really well received, and one of our councillors actually was holding up the draft OCP and this document saying, well, I think these are equivalent documents, because there is a lot of planning language in here and this notion of resilience and vision. So I see them as part and parcel. It is very much helping to inform the public discussion, and hopefully will be reflected in those land use policies.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and one other question of clarification too, and I don't know myself, and I'm not sure if anyone else does in the room either, with the business improvement associations. So you said there's a business improvement association levy that has been introduced?
Yes.
But it's not specific to the Ambleside Business Improvement
It is.
Association? Oh, it is, okay.
Yeah, there's, so under the business improvement area, the legislation legislation. I think it's in the community charter now. I thought it was in the Local Government Act. So a BIA establishes a geographic area in which a special levy may be collected. The amount of the levy is determined by the business association, and they establish a budget, what they need to generate and do. So that comes to, through the bylaw, to council as a, basically, this is our budget and funding request for 2018. We recoup that through the tax system, so it's in essence, what do you call it in finance? Not a forgivable grant, but it's
Revenue neutral kind of?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we're implicit in that because we're part of the collection mechanism, and we also make sure that the BIA is expending it on what it says it will do. So it's just basically pooling their resources. The difference between a BIA and a regular business association, which is based on voluntary memberships, is that you may have 10% of the businesses as members. So the BIA provides the equity. Everybody that benefits will pay, and through the formal bylaw process, people have an opportunity to say yay or nay, and council made their decision on that.
Interesting, yeah.
So they have to pay. The businesses
They have to, yeah.
In the geographic zone have to pay.
Yes. It's levied on the property owners, but then it's based through their triple net leases. It's paid for by the tenants.
Is any part of that funding that's collected used for housing-related purposes?
No, other than in the BIA advocating for those things via the OCP. Traditionally, a BIA organization is about branding, marketing, placemaking. But in some cases, when you don't have an entity, you have to sort of create a story. They can't really do any business recruitment right now because they don't have the premises and that. But ultimately, the business mix will be informed by the BIA working with leasing agents and property owners and the economic studies they will do. We have a deficiency of retailers of this type, and we know that they'll do well here. That'll create to the vibe, etc.
Is the amount of the levy based on the lease amount?
That each person pays.
Yeah,
It's done based on most of them are done based on assessed value.
okay.
So if there's a $500,000 budget and your property is worth 1% of the total assessment, then is it five?
It's 500,000, yeah, and that is.
1% is 5,000, right? Yeah. So that property would be levied 5,000. If there are multiple tenants, then that's broken up based on their leases, but it's based on value, which is equitable, in terms of size of property in most cases.
So what about the businesses that don't have a physical location?
Example being
Like yeah, exactly, like a consultant, somebody
they
that's-
work at home. You mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, they wouldn't be levied through BIA. And one of the things I'm going to be looking at is try to frame a study of home-based businesses in West Vancouver. Anecdotally, there could be someone knitting 12 sweaters a year over here and somebody running sweatshops in Southeast Asia out of their den. I have no idea who they are. But I met a young man who, he's a mechanical engineer, and he developed like an Apple Watch for snowboarders, and that stuff has all these weird knobs on it. It's called Yodel Up. He launched it, and he contacted me and wanted to know, well, is there venture capital free? What are the things we can do to support him? But one of the things I'm exploring is matching young entrepreneurs with mentors in the community. But we need to understand who our home-based sector is. And some BIs do have associate memberships that they can be part of.
So your BAs, oh sorry,
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah.
they're all based around like shopping centers, say like Caulfield Village and.
We only have one, and it's Ambleside and Dunderave.
Oh, okay.
Horseshoe Bay is a business association, so they collect member dues and do fundraising. Caulfield is a tenants association because it's a single owner. Again, Park Royal is one owner too, so they're all a little bit different.
You mentioned you were going to try to understand home-based businesses better. How are you going to do that?
I don't know, I have to
Okay.
figure that out, the
Okay.
terms of reference with our bylaws people, and get some input.
Could you keep us informed on that?
Absolutely,
Thank you.
because I mean, some of it we'll never know.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
You mentioned that one of the key focuses was this idea of developing emerging places for like a film studio or technical center. I'm interested in that. How are you going about that?
As part of Cypress Village, which is the next phase in Upperlands development, British Pacific Properties is looking at not only commercial to support residential, but potential employment center and tourism-related business. I have been meeting with three of the leading families in the film industry are West Vancouver residents. So we do have, I've been having tours meetings and just confirming that they'd all like to be there. And I know what the requirements are, so when land can become available, and I'm working on sites in the background. So that's an ongoing dialogue with on the Indigenous tourism front. I have a meeting later today on 3 potential sites. So all that work is ultimately happening. I don't know if I've answered your question. On the tech side, the key thing is combining that with housing. We had worked with Mark Betteridge, who was involved with Discovery Parks and Great Northern Way campus, and he said absolutely. And he cited an example where many of the tech businesses are actually choosing to leave Vancouver because of the high costs of housing to the Okanagan and Vancouver Island. And there's a gentleman who owns like a smaller tech firm who is establishing in Kelowna. He said, if I could only secure some housing. So Mark was a small investor in a 58-unit condo project. He mentioned that this gentleman just bought the whole project. So he had 58 units of housing that he could offer to key personnel. So that is such a huge challenge, is the housing piece.
Wow.
What does your current OCP say in general about economic development in West Bank?
It doesn't really say much. The 2004,
Yeah.
but the draft new OCP basically says what this does, not so much on the ground basis, but the directions, and it does borrow the resilience wording. So I think this very much aligns with the new OCP, and that's we anticipate there'll be a public hearing probably in end of May or in June.
Our current OCP, which is from 2010, 2011, says very little about economic development as well. There's basically a reference to the development of an economic development plan, but the specificity just is not there. And the expectation is that our OCP will be a project for the next council. It's time to do that. So the work that we're doing within this committee that relates to community economic development is coming up at a really good time in terms of fitting into that process meaningfully.
I think what's really key is the alignment, because an official community plan is essentially a land use document. And it has to be enabling, it has to be supportive of things. So it doesn't really need to have volumes about the local economy, but that is a key part of the community. So where do people work? Where do they shop? Where do they invest? It must be an integrated and fulsome discussion as part of the OCP, but the specific actions, things to pursue, are probably better in a standalone strategy that someone can implement.
We have some community lands that are in the process of potentially being developed, and one area that's relatively close to the cove and across from the school is currently proposed as industrial, or light industrial, or artisanal industrial. And there's much debate about that. Have you had any process like that with lands, and where you and came to a final decision on what to do with it? And how did you reach that decision?
Not really, because first of all, I think artisanal industrial is fascinating.
We just came up.
Which seems to make sense. You know, every community, like, you know, on the true industrial front, you know, the development of Cypress Village requires relocation of the municipal works yard, which is an industrial use. But we don't otherwise have any true industry in West Vancouver. If you look at the traditional terminology, heavy or light, in terms of manufacturing that. However, you know, the creative sector, this is another industry. So it's really your employment, your economic base. You may have need for industrial land, or I don't know, for various purposes, but again, I don't think that should be looked at on its own. It should be looked at as part of the bigger picture on your community needs. And
well, I'm thinking more not necessarily that it's industrial, but more that, like the Cypress Town Center, are there currently zonings that, or have there been zonings that have been changed because, you know, that there may have been a better use for that land? Or like, was the town center always the town center? Was there a process where it might be residential?
Well,
and
you know, more historically looking back, I mean, you know, some bold strikes. The 1958 OCP identified the need for improving derelict properties at the time and for addressing housing needs, and that led to the creation of the Ambleside Apartment District in 1959, which is a very large area. And if that didn't happen, we wouldn't have much rental housing. So that was a large-scale rezoning. To date, we haven't had really a lot of those opportunities. And I'd look to other communities as better examples, like some of the changes that have been happening at the City of Vancouver within neighborhoods, like Mount Pleasant had an area that went residential that went to light industrial. Now it's going back to tech and high density residential. So West Van isn't a very good example of that. But looking at North Vancouver, what's been happening around Lower Lonsdale and Lynn Valley and Lionsgate Village is probably a better example.
yeah, that's true.
Cool. I'm sure that was fascinating, and I'm sure that we can keep on going for another hour, but we're sort of out of time. We've got your contacts, and it's fantastic.
I'll just leave my business cards if you want to circulate these. Again, I'd be happy if there's another occasion a committee wanted to delve into something. It's a 20-minute ferry ride, so happy to do that.
Yeah, we can send delegations over to see.
Yeah, or come and as we implement our plan, you're welcome. I'm happy to invite you over to West Van as well.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
I actually have one last question that I
Yes,
think might
okay.
say a lot for our process. So it sounds like one of the, process-wise, one of the really important pieces for you guys figuring out what your opportunities were was engaging these business students and subject matter experts. Can you just briefly speak on the sort of formal engagement structure? Like,
The structure.
yeah, like, are you paying the students? Did you invite them in as student projects? Like, how are you getting them to come?
So the total, other than my salary, the total expenditure on this work was $16,000 over 2 years. That included a student intern I had last summer who developed a framework for the visitor strategy. So that was $11,000. And then we had basically expenses related. So it was an unpaid, if you will, partnership with UBC Sauder. And I think that will be a great thing to explore for Bowen, because they are, the school is looking to be relevant. CapU is as well. Paul Dangerfield, I'm supposed to meet with again in the next couple of weeks. He's the president of CapU. So depending on the programs they have in place, offering Bowen as a laboratory for that, and setting aside maybe some nominal budget to support that is a fantastic idea. It also gives you great exposure and potential interns or staffing down the road as well.
And then your subject matter experts were people in West Van?
No, not necessarily. A part of it's calling in favors.
Yeah.
So we reached out, and I am conscious of your time. Through the global network, we had 3 topic areas, and we had intense workshops. So one, for example, in the town center, we brought in Norm Hodson, architect, the man behind Bramall Island. We brought in Michael Penalosa, retail consultant, Michael Geller, other people. So we gave the students the opportunity to work with leaders in the field of the topic, as well as key municipal staff and business community stakeholders. And I'm happy to share the process around that with you.
Yeah, I think we should, we'll actually have to move
Yes,
on,
I know we
but we definitely will follow up on that and get
Yes.
names, and if we don't mind sharing some of that stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
We would love to do that, but Stephen, I think we're on the table, it's just been fascinating.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed that. So as I say, any questions come up, just feel free to email me or drop me a line.
Okay.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a good day.
See you later. Take care.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So I've been really remiss in that Wendy and Cheryl have been on the phone from the province all this time, and I've never said acknowledged them or said hello. So are you there, Wendy?
Yes, hi.
Sure.
Don't worry about it. This is Wendy Cho, regional manager for the Lower Mainland, and it's been a really good presentation and conversation. So I've been listening to it, and I hope to at some point come out and meet the committee members. So thank you.
Yeah, we'd love to see you. And is Cheryl there as well?
And good morning. And good morning, yes, Cheryl here, great discussion, and looking forward to, I'll be out with Wendy when we head over to Bowen Island, so looking forward to meeting everyone in person.
Good. Well, I hope we do that sooner rather than later, so perhaps in the next couple of meetings you'll have, it'd be great to meet you. Okay, well, thanks very much indeed. And so we have a council referral.
Emma Chow, and Community Planner 1, the Transportation Plan.
Hi, thanks, Steph. Good morning, committee members.
So we have just 25 minutes.
Yes, we'll make this quick, hopefully. So I just have a really quick presentation to give you guys a brief summary of the project and the resulting transportation plan. Slide right through. About 2 years ago, Council asked staff to initiate a project to develop Bowen Island's first transportation plan. It's to cover a 20-year planning horizon to guide policies, development, and public investment to improve transportation for Bowen Island. Key objectives involve active transportation, bus service, regional connections, safety at the Cardina intersection, more alternative ways to get around, parking management, and integration of different modes. Over the 2 years, the project went through 5 different phases. There was a review of past studies, collecting new data, engaging stakeholders, technical research, and through all of this, there was an emphasis on public engagement. By the end of the project, over 1,000 people had been involved, and they represented a diverse cross-section of the community and stakeholders. A lot of the feedback went to help form the community vision for Bowen Island transportation. And this infographic is actually printed out on the side of the room here in hard copy, and it was very generously done by a graphic facilitator from BC Healthy Communities to showcase this project, and that was done at no cost to Bowen Island, so very nice. And if any of you have had time to actually take a look at this, there's a lot of detail, a lot of things that represented the vision for the community. And I think true to Bowen Island culture, there's a real importance placed on connecting with nature, the option of being able to get out of the car, There's a sense of creativity, innovation, independence, while also acknowledging that we are an island and we have a reliance on our connections to the greater region. And it's very important to have all of these options integrated well so that transportation is easy and convenient. I think that's all summed up in the vision statement of simple, seamless, sustainable transportation options for every Bowen Islander. And to help us achieve this community vision, the plan employs 3 strategies. That's to develop better connections, more transportation options, and to encourage healthier transportation for both people and the environment. So we're talking about active modes for walking and cycling and things that produce less greenhouse gas emissions, like electric vehicles. The plan includes 30 plan elements, including priority projects such as the Cross Island Multi-Use Path, which is also part of the North Shore Spirit Trail, if any of you are familiar with that multi-use path. Safety improvements at the Cardina intersection that many of you might notice has already started. And also ongoing coordination of transportation schedules for on-island as well as for regional connections. The entire plan is estimated at just over $3 million over 20 years, with at least half of this estimated to be covered by external funding. So that's the plan in a nutshell. As far as the adoption process, the draft was brought to council in March, and through the month of April, we're going through referrals to committees and agencies, and the draft should be brought back to council for approval in May, immediately followed by the formal start of plan implementation. And I say formal because many of you probably noticed a lot of the plan elements are already in motion over the past year or so. But it's important that we get formal approval for budgeting and funding purposes. As mentioned before, about half of this plan is reliant on external funding, and a lot of that funding requires council approval of the transportation plan. And with that, I want to open this up for discussion. And I just want to say at this point that transportation, as actually mentioned by our guest speaker, it's a very important part of community economic development. We're talking about both the residents and also visitors. It's important for them to be able to get to their key destinations, their accommodations, the key sites, shopping, restaurants, businesses. The easier it is for them to get there, the more people will go. That being said, this plan, going back to the vision statement, is to improve transportation options for every Bowen Islander. And we had a lot of discussion what that meant. So it is residents, but also visitors and workers, people that need to come to the island from off island, that travel around on the island. And by providing better connections and more transportation options, we're making that easier for everyone. And I want to bring your attention to the 2 questions that were highlighted in the staff cover letter. That's cyclotourism. If any of you had a chance to review the draft, I'm referring to plan element B5, and that's cycling promotion. It's page 37 of the plan and page 58 of the agenda package. But essentially, this is an element that's scheduled for several years down the road after we have some established cycling infrastructure in place. And the intent of this element is really to increase the number of people that cycle on the island. And this will be done through awareness, education, and promotion campaigns. And there's a real opportunity here to collaborate with the Economic Development Committee to cast a wider regional net and position Bowen Island as a destination for cycling. This is something that's not explicitly spelled out in the plan, but I welcome any feedback on this point, and if it's something maybe you want to highlight, or if there's any other points in the plan that should be highlighted to really help positively impact economic development, or are there any points of concern that need to be addressed? That's what I'd like to hear from everyone, as well as any questions the committee may have for me or general feedback. That's pretty much it. So I think we have a good 15-20 minutes.
I have something. The communications team was discussing branding collaboration between Spirit Trail branding and community brand in Bowen Island.
Yes.
I wonder if anyone in the committee wants to speak to ways that they feel that that would be harmonious, because there is a distinct brand for the Spirit Trail. Ed?
I'm not aware of any of that, so sorry.
So if the multi-use path will
Yeah.
be in collaboration with the North Shore Spirit Trail,
Yeah?
they will need to be having their brand. So we need to think of ways that we can have our brand as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess just.
Oh, I see what
Yeah.
you're asking.
Yeah,
Yes.
what do you
Yeah,
guys
to
think?
give background context
Thank
to
you.
your comment, I mentioned our multi-use path that's proposed for the Cross Island multi-use path is, it has been accepted as part of the North Shore Spirit Trail, and that really opens up a lot of funding to Bowen Island. But that being said, we have to adhere to their development standard guidelines.
Okay.
So if any of you have been on the Spirit Trail over in North Van or West Van, you'll notice the signage and the colors, it's all branded and consistent. And that's something we need to reflect in our Spirit Trail while also being respectful of the Bowen Island brand. So
Okay.
I think that's what Steph.
Okay, now okay, I see what you mean. We have, the brand has many facets, and in fact, in the package, we're talking about re-energizing the branding committee. The visual identity, the taglines are one facet. Another facet, probably a deeper facet, is actually the brand story, which is about Bowen Island being a kind of a magical place where you cross this water, and like at most water crossings, there's a transformative element to it. So, I think, the notion Spirit Trail, even those words, kind of fits into the Bowen brand story. So that'd be fun to work on, actually.
Well, let's get it built first and then.
Yeah.
Let's get it built first.
Yes, but I mean, I would find that interesting. And I think there could be an integration with that. As little as I know, because I don't even know what their brand visual identity is. But it seems like Spirit Trail and what our brand story is about certainly are not, they're not contrary to each other in any way, shape, or form.
I have a question, Emma, about the businesses and so I see there's a lot of people that come off the early morning ferries to work on construction on Bowen Island, and a lot of people a lot of businesses that bring stuff in. Have there been consultation with any of those groups of people to see if there is any way that their needs can be met more effectively than every single person bringing their pickup truck off the ferry, or every business transporting a separate truck to bring things across? It just seems like there's opportunities there for rationalization.
No, that's a really good point, and it did come up, but I don't think it was, in terms of the priority list, high enough for us to actually make a plan element to address it. But it definitely did come up.
How did you decide that priority list? How was that?
That was tough. We had a lot of feedback, like I said, 2 years of engagement. And the priorities were really based on a lot of the public feedback, so in terms of the volume and council direction. Some of those requests also came to council in previous years and have received resolutions to move forward on those types of issues. There was also the question of cost and scope. So those were all considered in terms of what was feasible to really tackle in the plan, and in terms of priority, which one should we tackle first.
I think part of the problem with addressing the issue that we flagged, which is great, is that we don't know who those people are. And in the absence of a business licensing program, it ends up all being anecdotal. But my understanding is that piece is moving forward, and that may be helpful in terms of knowing who the external contractors are and be able to get information to you
Yeah,
about if there were options developed.
yeah, cool.
And when you're speaking of the cyclotourism, you're speaking about the Spirit Trail, correct? Or are you thinking about cycling generally on the island?
There's a couple plan elements related to improving cycling on the island, and there's an actual proposed network shown on the page. Package, 55? Is it 55? Yeah, 55 of the agenda package.
Yes.
So the core of that really is the multi-use path, that's the pink line. But then there will be secondary bikeways, really just shared roads that are wide enough and properly marked, suitable for cycling on. So there's the development of the cycling network as one element, and signage and parking, wayfinding and all of that. And then there's also the promotion side of
Okay.
things.
I'm not really a cycler, but I could, from a marketing point of view, I could see that Bowen Island's not exactly flat.
No.
For cycling.
Yeah.
If you've biked across it, I say it's a one-time bicycle.
I did it
Yeah.
3 times
Yes.
tonight, yeah.
Yeah, you go down Bowen Bay Hill.
Right now, even avid cyclists, I've heard many anecdotal stories, they would come over and they think it's a great destination
Yeah.
because you've got, your beaches and your mountains, it's beautiful, and they can bike on this terrain. It's not so much a question of the terrain, it's the safety. There's no shoulder, there's no dedicated protected bike lane, and there's no clear wayfinding. So once they try, they attempt one time, and they don't do it again. So at least having the multi-use path, which is paved wide and protected from vehicle traffic, it is suitable for biking, and having these connections, as you can see on the proposed network, would take you to like the golf course or to Tunstall Bay, like popular destinations. That being said, there's also a balance of, well, do we want to position Bowen as a place for cycling tourists? That might not really be compatible with our community.
Well, I think it's compatible in the sense that
It's
clean and
incompatible,
sustainable.
yeah.
And
It's quiet, it's peaceful.
sometimes the difficulty is not really an issue. Look at the grouse grind. Who'd have thought that, you could have thousands of people going up the grouse grind, right? You can actually market it as a challenge, the Bowen Island cycling challenge.
And it's for people that want to finish a loop, like you start from Blue Cove. This is the furthest western point of
Exactly,
Metro
yeah.
Vancouver.
Yes.
Yeah.
You
I think
mentioned
it's
paved. Is it paved, like the roads are paved, or?
It's actually, the multi-use path follows the main road, so it's actually an extension of the main road. You can imagine.
Same kind of pavement?
Just the exact road that you see right now.
Yes.
The lanes are going to be narrowed a little bit, so a bit of the pavement's reallocated to the active transportation, and then the shoulder is going to get paved out a little bit wider.
And there'll be some kind of barrier between the two.
Physical.
I think it'd be fantastic.
Is in the plan, do they reference the ferry from the Horseshoe Bay side and parking and like how people get to Bowen Island?
There's a couple elements. There's a table that summarizes all of the plan elements. I don't have the numbers all memorized.
Yeah.
But that would give you an idea of what is happening. Page 39 of the agenda. And we talk about things like accessibility at Horseshoe Bay, that's C2. So that really covers things like universal accessibility, things like all ages and abilities, not just wheelchairs, but other mobility devices, small children. It's really poorly designed right now. Horseshoe Bay and Snug Cove terminals are not designed with universal accessibility in mind. And talking about parking, I'm not sure.
Well, there's two things that I know from both my personal experience and my employees. And that is the only employees that I've had in the construction industry that have ever rode the bus have been local employees. And which is great, but off-island employees tend to drive, And my customers tend to pay for them to drive because really there's no economic advantage for them not to come on the ferry. In fact, there's a disincentive because you can't find parking, or parking is expensive, or it's equal in cost to driving the ferry, so they might as well just bring their car across. So the problem, I think, for workers is, sometimes they need to bring a vehicle, but other times they don't. Is that there's not the Horseshoe Bay part of it is the problem. And then, because if they got over here and could get on an e-bike or a bus or whatever, that might be a viable way to get to and from a job site. And then with cycling, I think it's the same thing, is if people have to drive across the ferry with their bikes on the back of the ferry, on the car, to cycle on Bowen Island, it sort of short circuits the whole premise of the trip. So it seems to me that the problem isn't, the problem is on Bowen Island, not wide enough roads and so on. But even if you solve that problem, if you're looking at visitors, then it doesn't solve the problem.
Yes, and I think you hit that nail right on the head. In the intro of this plan, it talks specifically about that. How do we get better networks on the island and more options of ways to get around? Well, we can't look at the island in isolation because however people travel here, if they can't continue their trip on the mainland, then they have no other option but to take the car, just like you said, and vice versa for them to come in. So we do look at the greater region, and regional partnerships is a huge part of this plan in every element. We're working with BC Ferries, with TransLink, Vancouver Coastal Health, ICBC, and identifying things like the cycling network. It connects at Horseshoe Bay to the rest of the region. Right now it's not, it's on paper, it's the plan moving forward, there's funding in place. So right now when you go over there you say well, where do we go on a bike? We have to throw it on a bus. But eventually there will be a bike, the Spirit Trail is meant to connect all the way to the terminal. And bring you into West Van and downtown. Things like car sharing. Car2Go used to be there, and it was a really valuable service for a lot of people, both on Bowen and Sunshine Coast and beyond. And we're working to try and bring maybe a different company, if not Car2Go, but that's another alternative to help people leave their car on the Horseshoe Bay side. Improving transit service, so that it's a viable option for people to take the bus to Horseshoe Bay and hop on the ferry. So all those little pieces are meant to address the connectivity from Bowen to the mainland without using a car.
Right.
Thanks. Just one final question on it is that have you considered any kind of Uber, Bowen Island Uber?
Yes. I think we face the same issues as Uber itself with the provincial legislation. But that being said, we've seen examples of innovative car share programs on the Sunshine Coast. It really comes down to, I have to say, a business case, having the density and the number of users to support something like a car share program. Or if it's specifically like an Uber, where it is a for-profit enterprise, then we do run into legal issues in terms of legislation. But that is currently being changed, so we're hopeful. But it is mentioned here as something that, as a municipality, we want to help and support and facilitate those types of innovative solutions.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Emma.
Can I ask one quick question?
Yep.
Sorry.
Well, we've run out of time.
Have we? Okay.
Yeah.
Can I get a recommendation for Emma for her report? I have that the Economic Development Committee endorse the transportation plan as it was presented at its April 20th, 2018 meeting with the following comments, or?
Well, I don't think we've read I haven't read the transport plan. I don't know how everybody else would feel about, officially endorsing it, but I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable with that, but I haven't read it. It sounds fantastic.
Is it necessary for the flow you're talking about it needs to be formally
Approved by council.
approved and the
By
details.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it requires committee endorsement. It's always good to have more support to bring it back to council with some sort of positive
I think if you wanted
feedback.
us to sort of formally endorse it, we would have to have another month to look at it and read it over and then have a quick discussion next time.
What do you think you need, Anna?
I would like to see this go to council in May.
Okay, well-
For, as mentioned before, really it is to get the ball rolling on a lot of the projects formally. But if you want to send comments in by email as you do review it, if you have anything specific you want addressed or acknowledged, I can include that in the report. I don't think we need a formal resolution if everyone's not prepared to do that.
Would it be the 28th of May?
26. Is it 28?
So
But yeah,
the second meeting in May?
Yeah.
So we could look at it
Yeah.
at our next.
Why don't we in the meantime try to read it, and then we'll have a quick 5-minute discussion of the 10-minute discussion of the next agenda,
Okay.
just to formally approve it. Then I think it's more powerful if we've actually read it.
Sounds good.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you.
so much.
Thank you, Emma.
Yeah, good, great. Sounds fantastic.
Yeah,
Can't wait to see that bill.
it's all free.
Hey?
It's all free.
Yeah.
Get that tax increase up to 9%.
Okay, any quick action items from the March 16th meeting?
Okay, 69. Okay, so from, I'll start with the March 16th then. Melanie Mason's Smart Cities. So actually Wendy was asking about the Smart Cities program, Barry. I said you might be a resource to speak to that. Oh, Robin as well. Did you talk to Melanie about the Smart Cities proposal?
I sent her an email and I didn't receive a reply back, but it was very close to the deadline, so I think we might have just kind of missed it. Like missed being helpful in coordinating anything.
Okay.
But yeah, I haven't heard back. So,
Yeah,
I
same
think
thing.
What was the deadline?
well,
It
it was
was-
like
yeah.
March
March
31st,
and
and I think I
March,
sent the email on like March 24th. Like it was only a week out, and we said, hey, can we help? And I have a feeling they would just sort of head down getting something done. I don't know.
I have an April 30th noted here, maybe that's something.
Oh.
I know that Kathy was finalizing something last Friday related to the
I have a
applications.
feeling the March 31st was like the public
Right.
outreach deadline, and then I'm guessing this month was the how do we put it formally to the actual thing. So, yeah, I reached out and I've just had too much going on. I haven't.
Okay, maybe when we get to the province section of the agenda, we can talk to Wendy more about that Smart Cities.
There was a draft version of the application that was included in the last council agenda. So for those who are interested in sort of where it was at, it looked very good. It was presented on table, but it should not be part of the agenda.
Okay, I'll try to include that next month. And Cheryl, you've got an action. Are you there?
Hi there, yes.
Hi, so we've got the Digital Economy Archive Smart Revolution webinar. Was that something?
Yes, now I have forwarded that now did I forward that to you? I did forward it to Wendy.
Okay.
But I can't recall if I sent it directly to you folks. Happy
I don't
to do so
recall
right now.
either.
Okay, you know what, I'll do it right now so you have it at your fingertips.
Thank you. Sure. And then poll for the business breakfast. Yes, I did
Oh.
that. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, hi there, it's Wendy.
Hi, Wendy.
Hi, sorry, I realized I was on mute, I was trying to have a conversation with you guys. So I just wanted to touch base on the smart community. So thanks for that update. And perhaps what I would like to share with you is if your community has already, drafted a potential application to the federal program, I want to just let you guys know that there is actually in the works a provincial smart communities pilot program. I'm not sure if you guys may be aware, and my understanding is that the criteria for the provincial smart communities pilot match fairly closely to the federal smart communities challenge.
Okay.
So if Bowen Island Municipality is potentially looking, I can definitely provide more information through the chair and to Steph as well. They are looking to launch the provincial Smart Community Pilot the week of, they're looking at the week of the BC Tech Summit week, which is May, I believe it's like May 14, May 15 next month.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, let's connect on that after, and we'll probably move Councillor Mason into that.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. And the subcommittee's draft tour terms of reference, thank you. Received all four, that's wonderful. Check, check, check.
Okay, all right, thanks, Steph.
Maybe we'll leave the others.
Yeah. Okay, any business arising from the minutes?
Okay. You were going to do a report on the business practice?
Yeah. So we had the business breakfast last Wednesday, and I think we had about 9 owners or managers of food-based companies. We had Ready Potato, we had Pub, Rustique, Artisan Meats, Snug,
Soup Fairy.
Soup Fairy.
Soup Fairy, which I never heard of.
Oh,
Sounds very good.
You're missing out,
Yeah.
yeah.
Easy dinner, yeah.
So I think it was a great opportunity to exchange views. Rod was there, and Maureen was there, Robin was there. So it was good, and I think they appreciated the fact that we were taking the time to listen to them. We cleared up, I think, the issues about the food truck, and we listened to their problems and their concerns, some of which are also well known, like housing is a huge problem, and they feel, I think the mood of their feeling was that council is not taking it seriously enough. Maureen explained what council was doing. I don't know if that appeased them totally. I mean, obviously it's not a solved problem yet, but at least they heard what is being done, and that's an ongoing thing. We heard also some interesting small issues that, well, smaller issues, but also kind of vexing and annoying things, like, for example, the businesses find that often the tourists are coming into their places to use the toilet, and sometimes the buses are pulling up outside businesses and tourists are pouring up to use the bathrooms, which takes up staff time in cleaning, keeping the places clean, and it also has an effect on the experience of their customers and other visitors and residents alike. So that seems to be the kind of thing where we could step in and do something, and we're going to raise that a bit later in this committee. But that's the sort of thing where we could act as a liaison and really pull something together. And I think it's so valuable just to sit down with them and listen to those kinds of things. So I don't know what anybody else would like to add, but I think the general feeling was it was a pretty positive meeting.
I'll definitely have one more thing. The 2 big takeaways I got was the Washington issue, which I think could have some answers to it. And the other one was the Buy on Bowen campaign.
Oh,
and I
yes,
thought
the
could
Buy on
be
Bowen.
really something for us, really
Yeah.
like an easy and makes total sense. And it was all from, I think last Christmas, just a local business person, Marie, is it Nays?
Yep.
Did a little campaign with the Santa hat and the chalkboard, and that was, people liked it, it was really successful, so we said, hey, and I don't think it's before my time, there was a Buy on Bowen campaign.
Yeah.
So it was just the idea of how could we revive that, and I think that would be something perfect for us as a committee, especially, and I think the time was identified, it was great, leading up to Christmas, so when the summer season's dying down, so that October, November time, timing the actual campaigns and then encouraging Christmas shopping and all that stuff. So something to have on our horizon, I think, for the fall.
That's a very good one. I forgot.
I just stumbled into the Buy on Bowen card, I think back in Cam and Cat days. Yeah. This, so it's in my purse.
I still
so
have
maybe-
mine too.
Yeah, maybe we can work on branding something like that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
B-O-Y-B.
Yes.
Buy on your Bowen.
Oh,
Wait, boy.
Okay.
Boy,
So that brings us to the subcommittees, and we don't really have subcommittee reports. But I'd like to just, I was just chatting it over with Ed, and I've got a few suggestions. We've got about 20 minutes for this, and I just thought it would be good to have a little bit more of a general thing. So, what are the things we're trying to get done this year? And I just want to make sure that these committees, actually I call them working groups rather than committees, because I don't want them to be sort of standing committees. They're working groups working on particular problems. And we have to balance what do we really like to get done versus what resources do we have available, because we're currently missing one member, and Jacqueline is so busy with the Arts Council and the Community Centre that it's really, she's not able to engage in working groups. So we have 7 people, and you know, we don't have too many working groups, so we'll blow a fuse. So here's
Do you know
what.
about Maya then?
Sorry?
Sorry for interrupting. You
Sorry?
know that Maya's resigned?
Yeah, I think everybody knows. Well, Maya has resigned, but she's available to. She's got a new job and she's good, so she's not able to keep going. And you know, I don't know who around this table is feeling stressed or what your capacity is, and I think probably we need to take that discussion up to the pub one night soon and ask everybody how everybody's feeling. We may not resolve this today, but when I look at the list of things we would like to get done, perhaps I'll just list them, make sure that we're on board with that.
Okay.
And then we can say what are the best ways of, which one do we want to tackle first, and what's the best way of getting them done, and see if these committees still work. So I have down, I think that the idea of this, we talked about community economic development or resilient economic development, some kind of economic plan, like we've heard from Stephen today, that we can put to council that can then be used to inform the OCP. I think that would be a huge, have a huge, powerful and long-term impact. So that's the first thing. Second, further the brand adoption. 3, improve communication with businesses. 5, solve the toilets issue. 6, next, launch Bowen. And then I think something around perhaps engaging with Tourism Bowen Island to integrate the tourism business sector with the wider business sector and the community. So I don't know what exactly, maybe helping in some kind of strategic planning or something like that. But that's yet to be decided. I don't know whether that's, I don't think the time's quite right for that, for Tourism Bowen Island, because that committee has been changing quite a bit, but we'd have to talk about that. So those are the 6 things I have. So the economic development plan, brand, communication with businesses, toilets, Bowen, and tourism. Maureen.
Take toilets off the list. That's not something for this committee. It can go to this Snug Cove Improvements Working Group and be dealt with in that way, if it's going to be dealt with.
So I'll put you as an action to take that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
do we need, would our support help, or is that not even necessary? Perfect.
No, it just needs to be put on the table there. And it'll probably be a matter of discussing with BC Ferries as well, whether they'd be prepared to cover part of the costs in the same way that they are covering part of the costs for the ferry marshalling when there are overloads down there.
It came up at our meeting, our last Tourism Bowen Island meeting, huge, because of course fewer members were at the breakfast meeting. And it was, yeah, so it's definitely on our radar, nothing that we can do, but we can lend our support.
Yeah.
And Maureen, would there be a long-term and a short-term? Like the long-term being permanent building and BC Ferries and all that, is there an idea for a short term? Like one of the ideas that came up at that
Porta
was,
potties.
yeah, porta potties this
Yeah.
summer. Like, can we make that happen? Porta potties and signage this summer.
I don't know if we can make it happen, but we can certainly ask and see.
Okay, but yeah, there isn't a, both the long term and short
And
term.
that definitely came
And
into.
it's, I think there was two things. One was signage, just to the existing places that are out of it. And then the other place was, you know, getting some locations away from, like in Arsenal Square and Village Square.
Mhm.
We
And,
can-
and even just mention of some signage to the ones that are in, near the baseball field or in the park or whatever, just.
Yeah.
So that's a request to Metro Vancouver, and they're redoing, well, they're doing the design work for the Davies Orchard this summer, so we just
Yeah.
brought it into the mix.
You know, can we, it would be great if we, because we sat in that meeting and they looked to us to take that forward a little bit, can we communicate with the people that were there at least, that this is what's going to happen?
You don't know at this point what's going to happen, other than it's going to another committee, so I think it makes more sense to hold off until there's been some discussion in the improvements group, and we get some feedback from Metro and from municipal staff.
Okay, so, well, I personally feel a bit of responsibility having been there and sitting through that and hearing them and saying, you know, yeah, we hear you, to follow up with them from us. So can we put it on the agenda for following up and hearing what that
Sure.
committee is going to do?
Yeah.
And then we
If you want, you can come and speak to the committee. It is going to be meeting immediately after our next EDC meeting. Did that?
Yes, that's exactly where it landed.
Yeah, so on May the 11th.
Right.
You're welcome to come if you
Yeah.
want to plead the case.
I've always wanted to talk about toilets too.
I just really don't think we should be
Yeah.
spending
Yes.
time on it in
Okay,
this
yes.
committee.
Cool,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah,
let's take it off. So let's off the agenda, Steph.
Yeah.
So, okay, so this the big thing to me at least, is this community economic development plan. What's the best way to tackle that? That's what we're talking about.
I think it might help to have a few more sessions with the speakers that are coming to talk to us about community economic development, because I don't know whether we all really have a good sense of what that might actually look like. Like, for example, on our work plan, we have develop community economic development collaboration grants, which I think is a great idea, but I don't know whether we really know how to foster those types of collaborative projects yet, like what they might look like. So next meeting, we have Silas White from Gibson's coming out, and they've done a lot of community economic development with businesses and figuring out how to do specific projects. So I think that might help figure out what kind of projects might come out of that, and then that will inform how we develop.
Okay, that's great.
And then also, for the meeting after, I guess that would be the June meeting, we're setting up having, if you guys are all into this, having Community Futures come out, which is an organization that specifically, it's a nonprofit that specifically supports municipalities to do community economic development. So, like, how do we do it? It's all-
Sorry, who's that in June?
Community Futures,
Ah.
yeah.
And if we look at our work plan, that's kind of going with our timelines, right?
Yeah.
Is that we're basically learning, getting research and doing that now, engaging over the summer, and then developing a plan later in the year.
One of the pieces that isn't happening here, though, is getting the word out to the community about the speakers who are coming. It would be really helpful, I think, for some other people to have heard what Steve was talking about this morning. So we may need to just give more of a push.
Okay.
Is that true though, Maura? Because he said that, you know, this is not a community engagement process, right? This is a...
He was talking specifically about one piece of what he was working on.
And he was saying it was a bedroom community, so we didn't want them weighing in on decisions we made around businesses.
I think it related to the economics of it, that the average or citizen wouldn't know what all the economics were, and they were doing that portion of it, but.
Yeah, but I still think there are members of our community who would have been interested in hearing what he had to say. And I wouldn't consider that necessarily to be community engagement, you know,
Okay.
for them to
Okay,
hear.
cool.
Sorry, with regards to what Michelle was talking about and the speakers that are coming, like it sounds like the community groups that might engage in that kind of development should be invited specifically. Like instead of like a general call to the population of Bowen. Like I can again, because I mentioned it before, I know that the Bowen Agricultural Alliance is taking a more active role in the farmers market. Like we should, I think, from my perspective, specifically invite that group,
Yeah,
and there's
that's a
probably
good
other
idea.
groups like that we should specifically invite.
Even the community foundation too would probably be good to have out, because we might partner with them in fostering some of their projects.
Okay, so what you were suggesting, Michelle, is that we have a couple more speakers before we really settle down to forming a working group and getting the working group going. Is that right?
I meant more like before we start doing the actual planning process, we could have the working group be the one deciding like, I mean, we already have the speakers, but maybe it would be helpful to have a working group decide who to invite. I don't know, do we need to do
Well,
that?
my thought so far, and I don't want to take extra time here, but is to describe the working group as essentially to start to flush out the kinds of things we were talking about, like, so who's going to participate, who participates, like just like top level description of where we're going next, so we have it written out and it's more formalized. And so like if we're going to start to engage with schools or so on, or look at that, like who are those people, record the things that Stephen said in a sort of a task force planning document. Like not the economic development plan, but a plan that will take us into what this task force actually does.
Okay, why don't we form that group, and their job is to flush out the plan for the plan. Does anybody?
I think that's what Ron has done here.
Well, that's what I was writing this basic outline that's included from. That's the place that it was coming from. Not writing a plan, but like how do we get ready to write a plan? And that's what Michelle's doing. That's what we're all doing together. So maybe we don't need a task force.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking,
right?
because we're kind of all doing that anyway. So do we need to make extra work of having another task force that's doing the same thing?
No, not as long as it gets described in one place and sort of contained, so it can come back to the group, so everyone gets up to the same level, I think.
But
I think that's the-
writing the plan is going to take a working group.
Yeah,
isn't it?
but that won't happen until, the summer or the fall at the.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we don't need that working group right now. The branding, what do you want to do? What could you do?
The terms of reference are in the package. I mentioned earlier that we had a very successful campaign with the visual identity and the characters, the icons, and the taglines. But there is more to the brand than that. Our mandate at that point was to create and to do a visual identity. I would like to continue implementing the brand story. We've started some work with Kathy Lalonde. We were trying to get a workshop with senior staff to, how do you live the brand? How do you actually put the brand story into action? And the brand story is also in your packet. How do you put it into action when dealing with our residents, when dealing with the public? There's a number of ways we can go forward. Like in some of the communications we have on our websites, a little more reference to the brand story. Now, one of the things, I'll be very quick about this, you don't necessarily use the words of the brand story, but the images, and you speak around it, because a lot of this is symbolic, because one of the key issues that came out of all of our research is what makes this place different from any other place is, one, is the trip across the water, and secondly, it's a really radical change after 20 minutes between the hustle and bustle of the mainland. So how do we leverage that in talking about who we are, what makes us different, what we stand for? We had a branding committee, what was it, last year, 2 years ago? 2 years ago. And it just went away. So I'd like to re-energize that. I've talked to Owen Plowman, who's the head of the Conservancy, and he was on it before. He'd be interested again. I'd like to reach out to Chris Staples. Chris did Rethink did all of this And they have done some brilliant work with IKEA on really the deep emotional story to tell. And of course, we can't do TV advertising, but maybe he can help us there. And I would like a couple other people, if any of you would be interested in doing this, because right now it's kind of brainstorming, how can we get the brand out there? And you know, we've done a ton of research, Community Foundation, John Reed's Lands, the branding research, and it's very clear that we have something very special and unique here. And I think the brand story will help us leverage that, not just for commercial use like tourism, but to inform how we think about our island. So if you're interested, let me know, and it'll be a working group. And
How often do you think you'll meet?
we were meeting, I was on this committee a couple of years ago. What made it work was we were having monthly working group meetings, which, although they're onerous, and we tried to make them fun, we held them at the pub or something, what it did was it kept us focused on the task. And I think, you know, because we're all volunteers and our lives are all over the place, that focus on the task is critical. Any thoughts, people who've been on it before?
It was fun.
I think that tourism would probably
I thought
have to be, yeah,
Yes.
be part of that.
Yes.
So, yes.
you would be
Edward,
drafted.
I will go and go to the pub and, yeah.
You have to go to the pub with Ed.
I know, right?
That's tough.
Then she goes to the pub and we
I don't, what are you talking about?
So,
No,
can
just
I,
like a regular Friday.
Okay, so Ed, that's a working group
Yes.
we're going to form now.
Yes.
And Ed's going to lead it. Maureen's going to be on it.
Yep.
Anybody else?
Owen, and we'll see if Chris can help us out.
Okay, great, thank you. And the Bowen, do we need a working group for that? I think that would be a good idea. Anybody think that?
did I hear you signing up for that? I'm taking names.
No, I was an adjunct on the grant.
So I'll publish a list next.
Maureen
that-
adjunct.
The two Maureen committee.
The two Maureen committee.
Two.
I think.
Motu.
I think the Bowen thing is something that is going to be looked at, being rolled out in the fall or late summer. So can that be tabled?
Well,
Or do you want to get started
But
now?
we probably need to get the ball rolling sometime soon, given it's April.
Yeah.
And next meeting's in May.
Yeah.
No, not particularly, just because I've got lots of other stuff on the go. Can the Buy on Bowen campaign be part of the communication engagement working group? Is that adding too much to the plate? I mean, it is
Well,
an engagement
yes.
program.
So yeah, and we haven't got to it yet, but my terms of reference were very light, sorry, compared to everybody else's. Mine were just a few points as to what it might do, but just knowing my own capacity, I can't take it on. But I'm just wondering, I don't know, we also have a budget, right? Like, I don't know if this is an appropriate use of it or not, but are there any of these items that we can throw some money at that to get them done? So I'm just kind of putting that out there as well. Not having everything relying on us as volunteers, because Buy on Bowen seems to me like something where we could potentially just put something together, see if there's somebody who could run it, you know, I don't know.
I met with Chris Staples a couple of days ago, and he expressed interest in helping to revive the Buy on Bowen campaign. It may make sense, given capacity, for it to maybe just come up within the branding group and see where it goes. Because I think once, if Chris gets his teeth into it, it'll get done.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Just like a little sniff.
Yeah.
Well, he was sniffing around it to begin with.
Yeah, see, I could definitely see how it could be part of the branding, very much have interviews in the newspaper with business owners, branded, better for being here and Buy on Bowen. Definitely could be a.
And get the new editor involved.
Okay.
Because she did that great big profile of Brian Middlecom in this week's.
Cool.
Was there, sorry, one last thing on the my own thing, was Marie involved in that, like, has anyone talked to Marie? Is she, Marie Nays, who did it last year?
I know, because it
Like,
literally just came
I
up at the breakfast
honestly,
meeting and-
I'm gonna say, I think that we need to communicate with her because she could be intending on doing this again,
Right.
not realizing that this whole other.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Marie Nays did this campaign last year where she was the one that went around and took all the photographs and put the poster together and put the campaign together.
Yeah.
She might be planning to do that again, and here we are trying to reinvent the wheel, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
a good idea.
So, yeah,
In fact, maybe you want to reach out to her and
yeah,
bring her
I
in.
can do that.
Yes.
Bring her in,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, I can
Coordinate,
do that.
that would be,
Yeah,
that would be
thanks, I know Marie's
ideal.
really got
Yeah.
that
Good
good
point.
point.
Do you want to
Okay.
keep me in the loop on that?
Yeah, I will, for sure.
Okay, so we've run out of time. I think my sense is right now, we just need the brand working group. And the rest, the other stuff, the economic development plan, the communication is a kind of ongoing thing. Tourism liaison, now we've got Maureen, we can keep on building up that liaison. Bowen, we've kind of morphed into a little bit of branding working group. Why don't we stick at that for now and move on?
So the only thing I might say is, and I don't think it needs a subcommittee or working group, but I'm happy to kind of wear the hat of the engagement kind of for the, and so maybe I'll just, if it's okay, work with Steph a bit directly, because I would like to, if it makes sense, set up something regular for businesses to
Okay.
connect with us as the
That would be
EDC.
great.
So if I'm okay to kind of have an action item for me personally.
So we have a communication engagement working group, Robin, of a committee of, led by Robin. Do you want to join, Michelle? Anybody else?
I don't know if I can commit to the time, because I probably want to be on the CED working group, so,
Okay.
Yeah, and it's more like I'll just kind of lead the charge. I'll just be the cheerleader to make sure that we don't let that drop.
Okay.
That will make sure that we do continue, like I'd love to see monthly, if that makes sense,
Okay.
engagement between the EDC and businesses in
Okay.
whatever format that may be. So I'll just
I'm
kind of-
happy to work with you. I'm
And Rod, Rod and Michelle, these speakers have been great. You've been instrumental in getting that. You're going to happy to continue doing that.
Yeah, so the one thing I'd say that I don't feel like got articulated well enough, and this is sort of a working group thing, but, and I like the idea of getting more community members to the meetings, so because then we're not gonna talk again until the next meeting, what are the action items for, who are we gonna invite and how are we gonna invite them for the next EDC meeting?
Well, can we have could you work in like a pub discussion or something, or coffee or whatever, and we could invite whoever wants to come, and maybe we could talk about that?
Why don't we, it doesn't take anything to form a working group. So
Mhm.
we just say, okay, we have an economic development plan working group, and right now we're just organizing these speakers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's not any big amount of work that's being done, it's just,
Yeah.
like Ed was saying, that consistency of, at least, even if we don't get together physically, as long, we talk about it.
Are
So,
you happy to be the leader of that, Rod?
Can you just see me on the CC on?
Are you happy to lead that?
Well, like Michelle's got the speaker thing kind of going on here, that's great, we'll just collaborate on it.
yeah.
Okay.
So, since we're all sitting here, I know that we're crushed for time, but does anyone have ideas of who we want to invite to the meetings for the speakers?
Can we take that offline? Can we ask people to
And
send
email
that?
it? Okay,
Yeah.
so action item for everybody to email me, I guess,
Yeah.
who we invite.
Okay.
CC me. please.
Cool.
Or just send it to the group,
Okay.
and then you don't see it. Is that right?
Okay.
It seems like that's a lot of emails flying around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, guys. We have to.
Okay, I have something very, very important, so.
And our adjournment isn't until June.
Sorry.
Our
Yep.
adjournment isn't until June.
think that's-
It was
I
supposed to be
tried that
11:30.
and I got shut down, so I must have left that typo at the very end because everything else got switched out.
Oh, it's supposed to be 11:30.
Sorry.
Well,
Email said May 20th for the meeting as well. So.
Well, I can, do you guys want to just, I'm kind of, 2 hours for these meetings I think is good, and everything, and I always think it's a good idea to start on time and finish on time, but I don't want to be a dictator about it.
Well, I've got a couple of things I just wanted to share with the committee that are nice things. So I kind of want to make sure I got at least 5 minutes. I assumed I would have. And we have our province liaison, and I'd like to hear what's new from the province, John.
Okay.
I'm okay to go an extra 5 or 10 minutes today or in general, just to make sure we hear from everybody, yeah.
Okay, let's finish at 2:42.
Yeah, I have to get the ferry, so
Okay.
I'd like to leave. I might just jump out at 22.
Okay.
Or maybe a little too
Can I
late.
just do one before Rod leaves then, please?
Just one, is it to do,
It's Silas next month is coming, and he will have a problem getting here by 9:30, and can we change the meeting to 10:30 next month for Silas White from Gibson's?
We could just have him at 10:30, right?
yeah, I don't have them at 10:30. Let's just do it.
Okay.
Okay, so we've done the subcommittee thing. We've got 2 subcommittees now, 2 working groups, or 3 working groups.
No, I'm not a
Wait,
worker.
You're okay.
Yeah.
Or you're okay.
You're right.
I'm a cheerleader.
You're a cheerleader. Okay, the province. I'd like to hear what, Sharon.
Hi, Cheryl and Wendy. Do you have an update from the province for us, our local government?
Yeah, sure. I'll just do one quick one. It's Wendy here. It's the Canada BC Job Grant. So they've just come up with a new program, and applications are now open. And this new CJG program, as we call it, it's under the Workforce Development Agreement. And there's some changes to this new revision of the program. And actually, Cheryl and I were talking, and she had a great idea, which was we would be happy to facilitate and bring on board an expert, I guess, in as a colleague of ours at Advanced Education and Skills Training Ministry, who is very familiar with the revised changes, and the individual would be happy to kind of maybe spend 10-15 minutes just to share some high-level highlights of what the key changes could be, and respond to any questions that you guys might have.
Sorry, expert in what? I didn't catch that. Expert
In the changes to the Canada BC Jobs Grant, Wendy?
Great.
Maybe you could just quickly explain what the Canada BC Jobs Grant is to the group.
Sure. I'll do my best, and Cheryl, please pipe in whenever. I am just learning, which is why I had offered to actually reach out to my colleague and said, hey, maybe at the next meeting in May, and she was more than happy. They're both of them actually, a gentleman and a lady. One of them more than happy to put in a call and speak to the group. But generally speaking, I believe the Canada BC Job Grant is for employers who want to, and it provides, I think, up to $10,000 grant. And some of the high-level changes that I am aware of, and Cheryl will share more information, is really around the skills training side of things. And also, I think there are some new streams under the program. It's basically to strengthen underemployed, unemployed individuals in the labor market, supporting employers and staff that are transitioning to increased different types of skills training, and also to support and encourage skills trainings that are more in management, leadership, soft types of skills training. So I think there are a few streams that vary from trade, apprenticeship, more specific type of skills training, to also more soft skills, leadership, management type training. And I'll let Cheryl pipe in here if she has anything other to add.
Well, and I think the opportunity side for the committee is that there have been some folks that have done, as you're beginning to engage businesses and you hear what some of their needs are, if there's something related to training that maybe for one employee that you wouldn't be able to bring a trainer over for both, but if you had 4 or 5 businesses, you could be putting in an application on behalf of those businesses to bring a trainer to Bowen to provide that support. So it allows employers to get training for their existing employees. So we've seen folks do some sales programs for staff. It can also sole entrepreneurs are also eligible, so you can send yourself to training. So often one that we see in communities relates to, that folks are interested in, relates to marketing. We've also done where we've done group applications for folks to a trained first host or world host training, like tourism customer service training. And it enables you to bring a trainer into your community instead of folks needing to go somewhere else. So there just could be some interesting options to explore, especially as your engagement continues with the businesses on Bowen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It would be great if we could get a one-page summary of the opportunity, and then we could send it out to businesses in our newsletter.
Does that exist? Is there like a one-pager somewhere online we could look for?
Yeah, there's a website that we can send you the link for, absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
Cool, thank you very much indeed.
We could
Okay.
use some people too trained as well.
Yeah, exactly. We can hire somebody to do that economic development. Great, Maureen, do you have any updates from
that's
tourism?
This morning.
Maureen 2.
Yeah, Maureen 2. You can call me Mo, actually, if everyone wants.
Mo.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, actually. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what I need to bring to the table here right now. We had a meeting last week, and obviously we talked a bit about the breakfast meeting and what came out of that. And it really became quite aware to everybody except our chair, who we educated there. I'm like writing poetry or something. Is that we as a group are now going to start focusing on tourism in the shoulder seasons.
Cool.
That's definitely becoming our focus. Yeah, it's a little bit heightened in the summer. As somebody who works in a business in the Cove, I'm a little bit not worried. I'm a little like preparing to be overwhelmed on those weekends where we are going to be really busy. And we know that. I work with the loggers group as well, as some of you may or may not know, and we will have a series of semi-pro loggers coming over this year to compete, and we're having a really hard time. I know, it's funny. We're having a really hard, but they're professional. They know what they're doing. We're having a really hard time finding.
on the ferry.
We're having a hard time finding places for them to stay because everything's booked.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, everything. So, which is great. We achieved our goal, but yeah, it's just.
So there's a capacity issue with tourism in this summer.
Yeah, as you
Yes.
are well aware,
Yes.
because of the idea of the food trucks and that sort of thing and all that. So
That's really good to hear.
yeah.
And if we can offer any help in facilitating planning around that, we have quite a lot of experience and capacity for facilitation.
Yeah.
That's traditionally been one of our areas, like with Ed and Sherry and Chris.
Yeah, and I think that's why I think we as a committee of tourism Bowen Island would be really interested in sitting on the branding committee. And how can we make this now work for us in other ways outside of we are come for a hike, we're nature, enjoy the outdoors. What can we do to broaden our reach?
And make them spend money.
Yeah, all year. Yeah.
Cool. That's great. Thank you. Bowen Island Arts Council, do you anything?
Jacqueline can be here. Right now, several things are happening. We're completing the final brand implementation of a new Arts Council brand, which will be unveiled sometime in the next 6 to 8 weeks, formally. And we're very involved, and that's why Jacqueline's not here, in the community center, and because I guess it's a fair to say we're partnering with the Muni on the construction and the planning and the construction of the and especially the fundraising with the community center. So that is taking Jacqueline's about 150% of her time. So.
Fantastic.
Get tired of thinking about Jacqueline.
Maureen.
Okay. Steph, could you get that email that I sent to you? And there are 2 attachments. And while you're getting that, I'll just go over what happened at the last council meeting, some of the high points. One was that we approved a housing agreement for the argued as ridge development. And those of you who may not be aware, that's down in King Edward Bay. The housing agreement is for 14 units for special needs people and seniors, and that's going to be moving forward really quite quickly. It'll be final adoption at our next council meeting. The Grafton Lakelands project passed third reading, and it has one more reading, but it's more or less a formality at this point. And when that moves forward, that's 120 units of market housing and 45 units of affordable rental and affordable home ownership. So that's a really big boost in terms of those two projects alone, a huge boost in terms of the potential housing stock on the island. The community paramedics gave a presentation. Council approved in, what did we do? We agreed to enter into an agreement with the Health Center Foundation, which is really, really important. We have sent a letter to the Canada Revenue Agency explaining what the partnership is there, and basically it's looking at siting the health center on lot 3 adjacent to the parking lot. A couple of other things, but I think those were the top points. So let's see if you managed to track down.
This doesn't have my work email on it, so I'll see how much old Yahoo account I don't use.
So what this is two things. There is the layout for the community profile, which reflects the new branding. So you guys saw the copy for the profile, but the layout is essentially done. It's going through final proofreading this weekend. And then the second thing that's in here.
You're going to look at it on my laptop.
Okay. The second thing is that Rethink is working on an application to the BC Economic Development Association for a marketing award for the branding initiative. Okay, so this is part of the application that's going to BC EDA. It's about 3 pages long, and it gives an overview of the brand story for people who are not really all that familiar with it. Can you scroll up? Okay. So there's a bit of history, and just keep going, Steph, if you can. The building blocks, introducing the mascots, and all the way through this there are links to a Google Drive, and it expands on the material that is there. You can just scroll up a little bit more. So all of the sample material is included here as well. But again, the final vetting of this is happening over the weekend, and it will go in. The deadline for the BCEDA submission is the 11th of May, and the awards are something like the 10th of June. So it's very, very quick. And it's a really strong presentation. I didn't circulate this to the committee because it still is in development, but once that it will go to council, and it will come back and be on our agenda package for next month. And can you look at the other the community profile?
This one? Word doc?
No. Yeah, that's it. So again, just scrolling through. So,
ooh, it looks beautiful.
Yeah, so there are 2 approaches that they've taken. One uses, and those are facing pages. This is the first option, which uses a lot of small photos. The second option uses longer vertical photos, and we've suggested that they use that format. So it's 16 pages, I believe, so it's comparable in length.
Would you send it to me?
Yeah, it's comparable in length to the last community profile, and it was done again on a volunteer basis by Levy. Sorry, I would have liked to have seen
I'm
that
sorry, you know
up
what,
there.
you sent it to me, here, I can do this. You sent it when we were talking about smart cities, I thought you were talking, I didn't know you were talking about today's meeting. Let's do that.
Okay, I'm gonna have to excuse
Yeah,
myself.
so I'm sorry, I have to go too, so I'm, you know,
You've pretty much seen what you needed to see.
You said that.
Thanks very much.
I need to.
Thanks, Ron.
thanks for all.
Not yet. It needs to be better.
I'm not sure. There's some things I'd like to.
Yeah, but he said, get through this process and then it's going to go out to you and
Okay,
to
all right.
other people. So
Okay.
don't forward it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mona. Steph, anything quickly, very quickly, Steph?
No? No.
Okay. All right, next meeting is Friday the 11th at 9:30.
So it looks like Stylus will be able to get here by 10, the 10, just after 10, so we'll
Yeah, well, we
reverse
can
the
be
agenda.
flexible, yeah. So I'm sorry to rush everybody. We'll have a little critique around the table. Why don't we do that for very quickly? How was the meeting? Are you?
I thought the speaker was superb and learned a lot. I'd rather have 2.5 hours and finish the things we start talking about, as opposed to being rushed at the end, because I felt really rushed.
Yeah.
Pretty much ditto.
I would say I'd like making sure it's very clear what the action items are, because we need to be moving forward with what we're actually doing.
Different note, if you haven't been up to the community lands to see it, Sunday, I think 2 p.m. is another tour, but it changed my idea about them once I saw it. I think until you visualize it, it's hard to make a judgment on it, and I think really walking it gave a different perspective.
Cool.
Yeah. Ditto.
To everybody?
Yeah.
Yay, first meeting.
Will you be back?
Sure.
I would like to have time to flesh things out and make things.
Okay. So my take on that is, 2 hours. Winston Churchill said, "There's no problem so complex that can't be solved in 20 minutes." The key to it is for us to be prepared when we get to the meetings. I think, 2 hours of everybody sitting together is a pretty long time. If we prepare and we know all the stuff and we read everything beforehand, we ought to be able to have really deep discussions in 2 hours. And we maybe don't need to stick to, such procedural stuff, but, spend so much time on procedure. But, that's just my point of view.
I was just gonna say, maybe it's, because today we had 2 presentations, and that took up half of our meeting time.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we can see that in advance. Oh, you know what, we have an hour's worth of presentations, we go to a 2.5 hour meeting, because then we have time for our discussion. In the meetings where we don't have those presentations, I think we get through quite easily in 2 hours. So it's more of a, when we know we have those presentations, maybe that's when we need to just, on a month-by-month basis, see if we need to expand.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground. Yeah.
Could we start them earlier if on those days? Is there really a better option than going later?
No problem for me.
Anyway, yeah, okay.
I'll be here at 9:30.
So no to earlier, because also that's, Silas won't be able to make it until 10:30 next week anyways.
Well, we can always,
Again, deal with
we can
other
always fit
issues.
him into it. It doesn't have to be in a certain.
Yeah.
I thought you said you won't be
No,
over here
I'm
at
just
9:30.
kidding.
Do you want to add? Do you want to add?
No, Robin made the point of
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Cheryl and Wendy.
All right, take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
It's really better now.
Can we have a social thing for the next meeting?
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Try to do it in the next